Well, hello again, everyone. It's Dan McTeague, President, Canadians for Affordable Energy, and here to talk about a policy that affects all of us because it's going to come out of our pocket one way or another. I was recently alarmed to find out that the Industry Committee, rather than always pursuing the significant moral lapses of this government on a whole pile of fronts, had actually taken the time to say, let's talk a little bit about the $50 to $55 billion that we are committing as a means of getting about $20 billion worth of investments from various companies to build electric vehicles, batteries, and whatnot. And that includes a long list of companies that have said yes, but have so far not really proceeded with doing what they're going to do. We'll talk about that a little later, the divisions that it causes, not only at the federal level, but also at the provincial level. The resolution by Conservative MP Rick Perkins sits on the committee, a committee I sat on for many years and was vice chair of for a good 10, 15 years. Basically said no. And of course, the no came from the Bloc, the Liberals, and the NDP. What is it that they have to hide about $55 billion of your money and mine that is going towards what appears to be an ever elusive goal of people wanting to buy electric vehicles, much less than have the mandates of forcing you into those by 2030 and again 2035 when it has to be 100%, 2030 it has to be 60%. The reality is that for the so-called progressives to have said no, it means that they don't want to really discuss much of the math. For a country as in debt as Canada is, $1.3 trillion, to commit $50 to $55 billion in order to get industry to cough up $20 billion sounds like a real sucker of a deal. And unfortunately, it looks like Canadians are going to be left on the hook, not because these aren't well pursued, these goals aren't noble of themselves, and does take into consideration that the automotive sector is lagging behind, but they completely ignore market forces as well as the reality that China is quite willing to provide us not only the technology, but these vehicles at a much cheaper price. So now that we have Northvolt, Volvo, saying no, they're not going to proceed because they're going to lay off a third of their staff in Sweden. Now that we have Ford saying no to the Ford plant in Oakville, now Stellantis isn't really moving ahead with its project. Now that, of course, we see Volkswagen isn't doing much in St. Thomas, we now have to ask the big question: was this all a commitment well worth our efforts, well worth money that the country doesn't have, for which it has to borrow? I think the reality, and it's now becoming very clear for most of us, as Canadians and Americans and the world is moving away from wider adoption of electric vehicles because of the concerns that people have with respects to how those vehicles operate, their cost, their inefficiency, their lack of reliability, the fact that they need to be subsidized to be built, they need to be subsidized to have the infrastructure put in place, they need to be subsidized to even buy. It doesn't sound like a very good economic principle deal. And if people don't want them, it doesn't matter what mandates government are going to be putting in place. Chances are governments and the political parties that advocate these things are the ones that are going to be put out of commission. There will not be mandates that we expect on these forcing people to drive these vehicles if the governments and the opposition parties that support them on the left continue to insist on something the world just doesn't want. That is because the reality is that we're going to continue to see an increase in the amount of take-up of fossil fuels. Like it or not, the world is going to consume far more oil than it is today. By 2050, we're going to see oil go from 103 million barrels a day consumed to about 140 million barrels a day. And those are not just guesstimates; they are true estimates from the Energy Information Agency. They're coming from some of the larger companies that do this kind of benchmarking, as well as OPEC. So the reality is that maybe we will have a point at some time down the road where electric vehicles make sense, but we also know that there's competition among the kind of electric vehicles. Some are solid state. The current kind are lithium. Of course, we do know about lithium. We know how it's extracted. We know that many countries have it. We know that the cobalt that's involved, and manganese and other products often have to be done with extraordinarily extensive invasive mining, not to mention that little children in the Democratic Republic of Congo have to extract that cobalt so we can virtue signal this, so we can drive around electric vehicles and pretend we're doing something environmentally cool and trendy. The reality couldn't be further from the truth. In order to increase the amount of mining to meet these global objectives set by international organizations like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and other forms of automotive grifters, it's going to take 3 to 5 times the amount of mining that we currently have done in all of our civilization in order to meet those goals. And the frank reality is the money, much less the ability to do that without substantial environmental damage, can't be done. And it's not just, of course, products for electric vehicles. It's products for photovoltaics, for solar panels, as well as for windmills that has to be taken into consideration. But I digress. The reality here is that we don't want to talk about massive commitment that we have made with the thinnest of majorities, a minority government that's holding off by a string, and there is apparently no fiscal accountability to Canadians. At a time when Canadians are having a tough go making ends meet, this government and its friends in the NDP and the Bloc, and of course the Green Party, want to continue down this road of ensuring that you pay for something you can't afford and for which your children will have to wind up paying for in terms of debt. And I have experience in this department. In the 1990s, I was a Liberal MP at a time in which we had to try to bring down the national debt that had accumulated over years under previous governments. And it was very difficult to do that, not without hitting social programs, but we did it as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And I think we're now in a deeper financial rut than we are at any point. Listen, folks, it's very easy to have government give you anything you want, pretend that we need all these things, when in fact we don't, and they're inefficient. It's quite another thing to have to pay the piper to pay for these things. So the reality, I think, for many of us is that the electric vehicle mandates, as well as the pursuit of trying to turn our automotive sector or industrial sector on its head to try to somehow suggest, as the federal and provincial governments have done, that this is the way ahead, now appears to be anything but the way ahead, is in fact a retrograde step backwards for our economy. And of course, we don't even have to talk about the federal government and all the political players on the left who seem to want to think nothing of spending money we don't have. Let's talk about the provinces. Quebec's now saying, hey, on Northbolt, we put in $7 billion. The federal government put in $7 billion. You're not spending it. We're not getting the grift that we're getting in other provinces like Ontario. Therefore, we think, not helping Northbolt, that is going bankrupt because of international circumstances, especially in Sweden, where it is headquartered. Northvolt should be supported by the government. So now you have the Minister of Industry, who doesn't want this issue discussed, now musing earlier this week with the idea that, hey, maybe we can buy out Northvolt. Maybe we can give them enough money so not only will they produce in Canada, they'll produce around the world. This is sheer insanity. And the federal government has the responsibility to tell people exactly how much money it's committed and how it's going to pay for it, assuming, of course, the market doesn't provide, as it is currently today, a cold shoulder to the future of electric vehicles, electric vehicle battery development, not to mention the competition among various types of electric vehicles. I mean, solid state is very different from lithium. Most people believe that the holy grail will in fact be the solid state battery, if such a thing can ever happen. But there's also reality of other types of energies and other forms. Hybrids are extremely popular. Many of the large companies, including the one I work for, full disclosure, says we'll never hit more than 30% EVs no matter what. The hybrid is the way to go. Perhaps some hydrogen, as well as other types of modalities, other types of technologies, including zero-emission gasoline. Yes, it's being developed with Toyota and Chevron. A lot of people will have to look at maybe in the 20 or 30 years we have from down the road to allow these companies, regardless of what we want to achieve those global ends, which I think they're fairly clear they want to try to attempt on their own. But why would a country like Canada permit itself to have people, being forced to pay through the nose at the hose or pay for these kind of things? The reality is that the country simply cannot afford it. EVs and the mandates to bring them about are a fantasy. And now we have a government and opposition, Liberals, New Democrats, Bloc and Green, that don't want to look at anything to do with accountability. If there's no accountability, then why are you shoving this down our throats? The reality is that we can't afford it, both in terms of personally buying it, as well as the country's ability to subsidize and to pay for this. It's a bad deal for Canada. It's going to continue to be a bad deal for the rest of the world. It's why a lot of automotive companies, smart ones at least, have never gone bankrupt, like Ford, have finally said, no, we're not going down this road. It's time to wake up, smell the coffee, and yet another reason to dump this very woke, progressive, liberal government that is bankrupting this nation. I'm Dan McTeague. Join in anytime you can. Love to hear from you, get some feedback. President at affordableenergy.ca. And of course, please hit that donate button. We can always use your help here.